Hello. A question if you need one or more lawyers is not as easy to answer as one might think, because of course it's a question of money, but not only a question of money. So, how many lawyers is enough? It depends, as you might imagine, and it depends on these several factors. First of all, as you probably know, here in North America, lawyers are not allowed to practice like all over the continent or even all over the country. Both in Canada and in the United States, lawyers need to be licensed in like separate states or in separate provinces or territories. So most probably a lawyer that you would contact would have one, two, rarely three licenses, but at least I've never met a lawyer who would be licensed to work in all the 10 provinces, the territories, and 50 states of the United States. So the first question would be if your case is confined to one jurisdiction or if there is a multi-jurisdictional issues. In many firms, as in ours, for example, there are lawyers who can practice in several jurisdictions. But for Quebec, in our firm, for example, it's France and Ontario. But again, maybe yours would be Quebec and Newfoundland, or Quebec and New York or California. So, in such a situation, you would necessarily need either lawyers from both jurisdictions, just to be sure that what you are doing is legal in both, or at least a lawyer, or maybe better, a lawyer who would be licensed to practice in both, but it's harder to find one. Uh, why it is important? Because let's say that about state issue is close to my domain of practice. Uh, Limitation period in Ontario, for example, is like usually 2 years, in Quebec 3 years. Certain kinds of legacies are acceptable in Quebec but not acceptable in France, for example. Uh, the formalities as to how the last will, should be made are also different, and technically something that would be automatically working in Quebec might not work as well in France, Ontario, or any other jurisdiction, and vice versa. Survivorship clause of Ontario is not as much valid in Quebec. Uh, Trusts are governed by different rules, or at least not entirely same rules in the common law provinces or in the United States as here in Quebec, and again vice versa. Um, Even obligations and rights of a liquidator in Quebec, or executor, or trustee, or administrator in some other jurisdictions are not the same, and the rules governing them are not the same. Well, there are a lot of similarities, of course, but there are nuances, particularly when it comes to taxation, actually. So, again, if you have issues in several provinces, states, territories, not to mention, again, several countries in Europe or basically all over the world, uh, it's wise to have an advice from both or all of those jurisdictions, though sometimes, in order not to make a mess in one head, non legal head, let's put it this way, it's prudent to hire one like central managing lawyer in one jurisdiction and let that lawyer find legal advice, seek and find legal advice from other jurisdictions. But let's say we are talking about the same jurisdiction. even here in Quebec, in our case, one lawyer rarely has like profound expertise in all the domains possible. So mostly it's still necessary, or at least very much advisable, to consult other lawyers with like other expert opinions in interrelated domains. And of course, yes, some lawyers have uh, good and profound expertise in many, at least in those which are often interconnected. But not all of us, not always. So in such a situation, again, it might be a good idea to have another lawyer at least consulted. Not to mention that seeking a second opinion, very much advisable thing if you have any doubts, of course. Um, Again, there might be that the jurisdiction is one, or your lawyer has legal expertise in both jurisdictions. It might be that the legal domain is precisely that, but the workload is so great that one lawyer cannot simply deal with that. And you're lucky if it's a law firm with several lawyers and the possibility to just allocate some tasks. But again, law firms might be bigger, might be smaller, there are other concerns. So even if you know that there is one lawyer in charge, it's usually reassuring that there are other lawyers who might be of service, might be of help if there is a sudden spike, or not even sudden, like planned spike in workload with respect to your case. Because usually, especially when it comes to litigation, it's not coherent, like always the same workload. Sometimes it's a huge pause, almost nothing is done. Sometimes you need several lawyers right now to work on your case because the hearing is inside. Um, Also, of course, some law firms have other specialists like notaries, accountants available within the firm, others don't. And again, there might be a good idea, though it's not exactly the question of how many lawyers you need. And again, some lawyers have expertise in more than legal domain. There might be a lawyer who would be also uh, like bearing an experience in accounting, for example, or something else. Well, a lawyer, at least in Quebec, cannot be a notary at the same time, but in other provinces it's possible. Uh, so again, it might be necessary to find another specialist, and then there will be a question: who will be the managing person in all that, your lawyer or yourself? And if you're sure that you have all the necessary capabilities, of course it's like less expensive for you to collect all the information and advice from all those specialists. But what if not? And again, of course, if there is no money issue, then it's better to have many lawyers working in a team, well coordinated, with their input on their own areas of expertise, jurisdiction, and so forth, but it's costly. And once it comes to that like balancing exercise, sometimes you understand that, well, maybe it's preferable, but you simply cannot afford it. Or at least, even if you can afford it, it's not reasonable to spend this amount of money on maybe not so complicated, so difficult, and so important question. And in such a situation, of course, you should remember about mediation, arbitration, negotiation, other ways to resolve the issue without going all the way to the trial. But again, who knows what's the situation? All those questions, the necessity, or even if it's recommended or if it's desirable to have several lawyers on the case, it's a question that you should discuss with your lawyer, actually. Uh, it might be that the law firm where you're working, which you're working with, can allow all that in one package, or maybe not. So ask those questions, discuss those things, and then make an informed decision. What is it that you actually need? One lawyer, two lawyers, several lawyers, and additional experts, one managing lawyer and several lawyers invited to a particular discussion, and so forth. As you see, the answer to this question is it depends. Thank you and have a nice day.